Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so this week is just going to be the one episode of the show. We're kind of back to normal, but I think you'll agree, I think this is going to be a rather damn good tasting. As you can tell from the introductory picture, it is another Springbank episode of the show, and well, I think I've done a few of them over the course of the last few years of doing these videos, and well, why not? I'm a big fan of the distillery, as I know a number of you guys are, judging by the number of views that the Springbank episodes of the show tend to receive. And also the other reason I tend to like to do them is, of course, the distillery are incredibly generous in sending me samples. I mean, you know, we're not talking itty little bit of bottles here, we're talking, you know, nice generous sized samples. So big thank you to Grant McPherson at Springbank for most of the samples in today's tasting. The 14-year-old limited edition bourbon matured release from last year was the sample kindly came from a customer called Monish, so a big thank you to him for that sample. And that kind of leads me on. I mean, if you guys are watching, you know, want me to review something, want my opinion on it, you know, please feel free to send a sample in the post, and I'll see what I can do. But anyway, not really an awful lot to say about the distillery, that, as I haven't said before, but we shall just take a look at this afternoon's lineup. Without excitement, facing the night all alone, but then you came and you changed it. Okay, so we're going to kick off with last year's 10-year-old local barley bottling. It was bottled at a strength of 57.3%, and the casks that they used were 70% American oak or 70% bourbon and 30% sherry, which is exactly the opposite way around to the 12-year-old cask strength, which I'm sure there is a symmetry at play there, shall we say. Second, I mean, this is probably a bit of an odd way. Well, I've got a bit of an odd lineup, I suppose. I mean, I normally do youngest to oldest, but because I've got so many different cask types and all that, I'm kind of doing it on sort of what I think is probably the best way of doing it on the flavour profile. So the second bottling we'll be looking at is, like I said, last year's limited edition 14-year-old, which was bottled at 55.8% and was wholly matured in ex-bourbon casks. Wonder if some of them were first filled, but we shall find out when we get to the nose. And then I thought it might be interesting to compare 12-year-old cask strength bottlings. Now, as you probably know, the distillery has 2 releases each year of the 12-year-old cask strength, which is aged for 12 years, funnily enough, in 70% in ex-sherry casks and 30% in ex-American oak. The first bottling I'm going to be looking at is last year's bottling, the tail end of last year's bottling, which was 56.5%, and then I'm going to look at the brand spanking new 2018 release, which is bottled at 56.3. So well, similar ABVs, and theoretically should come out fairly similar, but we shall obviously find out. And then, eagle-eyed viewers amongst you might have noticed that it's a new Glencairn glass. Yes, I've replaced the other one, and quite a smart one it is as well. I don't know if you can quite see that. It's the cut glass Glencairn that they produce, and it's obviously branded with our logo, and you can purchase it from us if you so desire. They're not cheap, it has to be said. I think £25.50 a glass, but really nice and weighty, and I think they look pretty cool actually. So I thought I'd save that for the iconic 25-year-old. This is this year's bottling of the 25-year-old, bottled at 46%, aged I believe entirely in refill sherry, I think. I could be wrong, and if I am, somebody will no doubt point that out. And finally, a bit of peat. Not to say that there isn't a little bit of peat in Springbank, but as you well know, the peated malt that they make is Longrow, and this is this year's Longrow Red bottling. It's 11 years old. It's bottled at 55.9, and I believe it spent 9 years in bourbon casks and 2 years in ex-Cabernet Franc casks. I'm guessing probably from the Loire Valley, as that has a tendency to be where most of the Cabernet Franc, or the best Cabernet Franc, shall we say, tends to be grown. Although they do grow Cabernet Franc in Bordeaux, so it might be an ex-Bordeaux cask. I honestly don't know, or casks, depending upon how you go. Anyway, but that's fairly irrelevant. It's Cabernet Franc, and it should be slightly different from previous bottlings. I think they've done a port finished one, and I think they've done Cab Sauvignon. But anyway, so this is the Cab Franc, and we shall see what that one's like at the very end. So let's kick off with the local barley.
Remember, you can take my passion, you can buy my heart.
Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Really fresh, really crisp, really salty. I'm getting some lovely peach, tangerine, and plenty of subtle American oak. It's certainly not hugely vanilla, but there's some lovely soft vanilla character. So I would guess that the casks were predominantly refill casks. There's a little bit of sherry just sort of kind of sitting in the background, and I must admit this is my favoured guise, shall we say, of Springbank. You know, predominantly American oak with just a smidge of sherry, but it's wonderfully earthy. It's got that classic Springbank maltiness. Like I said, really salty, slightly fishy, elegant, but sort of obviously has that sort of edge to it, that slightly gritty edge that I love about Springbank, and certainly about the Springbank sherry casks anyway. Little touch of coffee coming through, but that is just an absolutely stunning nose. I mean, I know the local barley bottlings were pretty expensive, 90 odd quid I think, and when you think about it, 90 odd quid for a 10-year-old is a lot of money for a 10-year-old, but quality of this is absolutely stunningly good. There's a lovely barley character to it, sort of not quite gristy, but a really lovely fresh barley character. It's really, really appealing. See what the palate gives us. That's quite got a kick at the end, it has to be said. I mean, well, it's 57.3, so probably not a surprise really. Lovely spiciness though. So it kind of opens up with quite a lot of the American oak character. I'm certainly getting a lot of vanilla, slight creaminess, and then comes the barley, coffee, a little bit of chocolate, some malt, spice. Little bit, the sherry kind of comes through really on the sort of intermediate part of the palate, sort of between the middle and the finish. It kind of goes American oak, sort of spirit character, sort of maltiness, and then you get the little bit of dried fruit from the sherry, and it kind of finishes up with quite a bit of alcohol and quite a lot of spice. It's a little bit tight on the finish, so I'm going to add a little drop of water and see what that does to it. But oh god, that's intense. I mean, that really is intense, and again it has that lovely freshness, that lovely barleyed character, and it's just wonderfully balanced. This is just an absolute stunning bottling, it has to be said. A little bit more oily now on the nose, more of the kind of classic fish oils that I tend to get, sort of almost kind of cod liver oil that I tend to get with Springbank. More citrus, there's more barley. The sherry has kind of really kind of disappeared, and it's kind of showing more like I would expect sort of American oak aged Springbank to show. Let's see what the palate gives now. weighty, a lot more fruit now, a lot more barley, some citrus, some tangerine, apricot. A little bit drying on the finish, but that's got some lovely chocolatey notes coming through, sort of chocolatey tannin, a bit of grit from the oak. I like that. I think that's really very, very impressive, and again it has that natural character that that I get with Springbank. Not to say that other whiskies are not natural, but you know what I mean. That's nice.
You can buy my heart. There's nothing that could stop.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the 14-year-old. So, wholly aged in ex-American oak, or ex-bourbon casks. Let's see what the nose gives us. Bleeding hell! That's a big and oaky, chunky nose. It has to be said. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some first fill American oak had gone into this. There's some saltiness, there's some fishiness, but whoa, that's a monstrously oaky nose. Lots of creamy vanillins and even some tight tannin as well. Slightly milky. I mean, I like it. It's an impressive whiskey, but it is a bloody oak monster. It has to be said. I think this is the this particular bottling, certainly from the feedback that I got from customers, was quite divisive. There were a number of customers that loved it, and there were a number of customers that really couldn't get their heads around it, and it is just really unusual by Springbank standards. There is a little bit of that sort of natural grittiness, but not a lot. It's very polished. And very oaky. Let's see what the palate gives us. Again, quite oaky, milky, vanilled, toffee. Quite sweet in actual fact, and again there's a little bit of tannin notes, a little bit of that gritty, grainy kind of character kind of coming through, a little bit of spice, a little bit of fish oils, malt, but the oak is definitely sort of the dominant factor in this particular bottling, and again I like it. I think there are other bottlings that I prefer to it, but I think this is interesting. It's certainly Springbank, as you've probably not seen it before. I certainly can't remember a bottling that was quite so overtly American oaky. But then I'd have to obviously go back through reams of tasting notes, as I seem to have tasted an awful lot of Springbank over the years. But it's interesting, I think. So so yeah, not too bad.
Friendship ended up in sin. This will never be the same.
Okay, so let's move on to the first of the 12-year-olds, and so this is the 2017 release, 56.5%. Let's see what those gives us. Now, most of the 12-year-old releases tend to be stonking sherry monsters, even though there only generally tends to be 70-30. The sherry does tend to be the sort of like the real dominant factor. Now, I'm not getting a huge amount of sherry here, or not. So I rephrase that. I'm not getting as much sherry character as I would normally expect. It's got quite a refill sherry character, and the American oak seems to be punching above its weight, and although not quite like the local barley, it's certainly more American oak character, sort of fish, a little bit of earthy peat, a little bit of manure, plenty of malt, a little bit of treacle. The sherry is kind of quite sort of delicate, sitting in the background. I remember when I tasted this, I was really impressed, and still, really impressed. This is possibly my favourite bottling of the 12-year-old. mainly because, like I said, the 12-year-old does have a tendency to be very, very heavy on the Oloroso character, which I don't mind to a certain extent, and I do love the way the sherry character gets really gritty and kind of very natural, as opposed to the sort of like the polished sherry that you would get in, say, Macallan or Dalmore or something of that ilk. I kind of like that kind of... Dirty is the wrong word, because I don't think it's dirty. A lot of people do seem to sort of say they think it's, you know, a little bit of a dirtiness. Obviously, if there's a sulphur blemish, to me that says dirty. But to me, I would tend to use the term natural. It has a real sort of natural kind of gritty, slightly tannic kind of character. But anyway, let's getting back to the nose on this. Like I said, a lot more of the American oak character, a lot more barley, fish notes, and a lot less sherry. So let's see what the palate gives. Quite chocolatey, coffee, more sherry on the palate, bitter spices, quite peppery, a little bit of peat, earth, malt. Yeah, it says it's more 12-year-old cask strength on the palate, but again, the sherry is not sort of overwhelming. It's not a huge sherry kind of monster. I think it's really nicely balanced, and certainly I'm getting the American oak kind of coming through on the finish. I'm getting the vanilla, I'm getting the barley, and yeah, like I said, I think this was probably one of my favourite 12-year-olds that I've tasted, and that's high praise, I think. Anyway, let's see what a little drop of water does. Even less sherry now, which is quite amazing, and more American oak. It's still got that edge to it, that sort of like coffee, getting a bit more tar, a little bit more salt. Let's see what it tastes like. Really rounded, very vanilla. Not as much as obviously as the 14-year-old Bourbon oak, but it has that sort of soft vanilla character, and the sherry is just sitting at the edges, giving a little bit of coffee, a little bit of dark chocolate, and yeah, I like that. Even getting a little bit of a violety note on the finish, and that's one of the things I often tend to find in medium to sort of older Springbanks. That sort of little bit of not quite Parma violet, but sort of violet. Well, it certainly says to me violet anyway. But yeah, that's pretty damn good.
You can take my passion, you can buy my heart. There's nothing.
Okay, so let's move on to this year's 12-year-old, which we have sat on the shelf and available to purchase. I still have some stock, so if you like the sound of this, then maybe worthwhile grabbing one. Let's see what the nose goes. No, that's more traditional 12-year-old. Lot of sherry, but the American oak is tempering it, and again giving it a kind of almost a sort of a refill sherry kind of feel. More dried fruits, a little bit of date, touch of walnut, plenty of malt, salt. It's it's a nice sweetness. The dried fruit has a nice sweetness, a sort of raisiny, sort of sun-dried raisin kind of character. Again, sort of a little bit of a fishiness to it. Quite rounded, although again a little bit of a grainy, gritty tannin note just at the back. And again, it's kind of classically sort of 12-year-old Springbank, although I have come across more overt sherried Springbanks, but this has certainly got plenty of sherry character for those of you that like that kind of thing. See what the palate's like. That's a malty, chewy finish, it has to be said. Again, more sherry on the palate. Spice, pepper, dried fruits, walnut, tar, malt. Not getting a lot of the American oak component, it has to be said. Real tongue-tingling, salty Campbelltown salt finish. Wonderful liveliness to it, has to be said. Quite gritty, again, very natural, very Springbank, and I mean, I like that. I mean, it's got loads and loads of character and personality, I suppose if I'm going to have a sherry malt, I like my sherry to be a little bit on the sort of gritty, raw kind of side, a little bit more natural in character, and certainly Springbank, like I say, fits the bill on that. Touch of flintiness almost. That's quite unusual. It's not sulphur, not gunflint. It's kind of flint, if you see what I mean. It's kind of, and again, sort of the sherry is a little bit softer now. It's still quite dominant, although I am now starting to get some of the American oak kind of character. Some barley, more fish. Yeah, that's quite impressive. It has to be said. I think although the sherry is still relatively dominant, the American oak has kind of come back now once you've given it a little bit of water. See what the palate's like now. That's a lovely, moist and juicy, succulent palate. Dates, prunes, walnut. Again, the sherry is probably a little bit more dominant, but you are getting a little bit more of the American oak kind of coming in. It's giving it a bit of a sort of a lightness to it, a bit of a lift, if you like. Really salty finish. Yeah, and really fishy as well. That's impressive. Okay, and so let's move on to the 25-year-old. Long gone are the days when you could pick up a 25 for less than 3 figures, it has to be said. Let's see what this one's like then, shall we? Pleasantly mature, but not as mature as some 25-year-olds I've come across. This has got quite youthfulness, and it's got, although the sherry has that sort of slightly armagnac-y, kind of cognac-y, kind of dried fruit character. Yeah, it's probably slightly more cognac-y than armagnac. It's got a lightness to it. The refill sort of sherry casks, it's not a big dark sherried monster. It's elegant. There's even a little bit of toastiness kind of coming through. Wonderfully fishy, mature. Even some sawdusty vanillins. God, that's a lovely, lovely nose. And I mean, this is again how I like my Springbank. Although there is no American oak here, it's not a big thumping sherry monster. It's an elegant sherry monster. And elegant, yeah, you know what I mean. It's just absolutely stunning. It has to be said. If you could smell this, you'd be loving it as well. I'm pretty certain, and it is just absolutely gorgeous. But it has that sort of kind of youthfulness to it. It is not as mature as some 25-year-olds that I've come across. See what the palate's like. Oh my God, that's a lovely finish. Juicy, soft, barleyed, touch of pepper, violets, a little bit of earth. Again, the sherry is really elegant, really quite delicate in actual fact. There is still a little bit of a grittiness to it, a little bit of a tannic quality, but I'm getting lots of oak vanillins. I'm getting lots of, and you know, you can obviously get oak vanillins from sherry casks, because obviously all casks will give you vanilla notes of some form or description. It's just that when the sherry has been in it, that tends to be sort of like the dominant characteristic, because obviously the cask breathes and absorbs the what was in it from previous fillings. But that's got a lovely vanilla note, almost kind of dusty, almost sort of verging on that sort of old American oak kind of character. That's how well balanced this particular 25-year-old is, and it's absolutely stunning. And let's finish with a bit of peat, a bit of the Longrow Red. Let's see what those gives us. Wonderfully earthy, gritty, malty peat, really fishy, really kind of Campbelltown amplified, I suppose. The wininess is really quite subtle, and there's certainly no butyric notes, and I mean maybe that's just the kind of what you get from Amarone cask or things like that. I mean, I've certainly I can't remember which one. It might have been the Hazelburn Amarone finish or some. No, I think it was a Longrow Amarone, I think. And oh my God, that was just sort of like unreal. It was just like slapping you around the head with sort of peat and sort of butricity. It was just sort of like. But anyway, I digress. This is nothing like that at all. It is actually quite civilised. The wininess is all kind of sitting in the background. You are getting a little bit of kind of red fruit, a little bit of almost kind of red cherry, a little touch of spice, but it's that kind of sort of American oak character that's really coming through in the peat and the fish and the tar and the oiliness. But it's that dry peat. You could tell this is not an Islay. It doesn't have that kind of peat profile, and that's what I love about Longrow. And it's not like a mainland peat profile. It just has its own peat profile. Gosh, it's just fantastically good. Unfortunately, I've sold all my allocations, so you might be able to get it elsewhere. But right, let's see what the palate sign then, shall we? Oh, that's a tarry old finish. The wine is a little bit more noticeable on the palate. It kind of, interestingly, it kind of kicks off with the wininess, and then that sort of dissipates a bit, and I'm getting the American oak, I'm getting the barley, I'm getting the peat, the tar, the fish, and then the wininess kind of comes back again on the finish, and it has a little bit of a almost kind of citric-y, kind of mouth-watering. I mean, part of that will be the alcohol. I mean, that's 55.9, but it has a real minerality, a real freshness kind of on the finish, all wrapped up in that kind of Campbelltown salt character. Amazingly complex. I mean, like I said, I do love Longrow, and I love this one. I think it's really impressive, really well balanced. It's not too OTT on the wininess. It's all kind of like quite well balanced, and as you well know, balance is the thing that I most look for in a whiskey. So a lot less wininess now. Once you put a little drop of water with it, I'm certainly getting more kind of classically sort of American oak aged Longrow. Yeah, it's got more sort of more vanillins, maybe a smidgen of toffee, but it's got that dry, gritty peat. Oh, stunning, absolutely fantastic. Let's see what the nose palate is. still pretty chewy, still pretty malty. Really not a great deal of change actually on the palate. Again, it kind of opens up with the wininess, although the wininess is a bit subtler. There is a little bit more of the American oak age character, and the wininess does come back on the finish. Still pretty spicy, very salty, and still intensely peated. Real earthy kind of no, not dirty, earthy. No, it's not manure. It is earthy. It's earthy kind of peat. It's earthy, dry kind of peat. Oh God, that's a mouthful. Okay, so let's sum this week's episode of the show up. Loved the local barley. I thought the local barley was absolutely gorgeous. Really my cup of tea. Like I said, predominantly American oak, smidgen of sherry. Really balanced, really harmonious, absolutely fantastic. The 14-year-old, I mean, yeah, I liked it. I probably didn't like it as much as I liked the local barley. I think the oak was maybe a little bit too aggressive for the spirit, but interesting, an interesting experiment. And I certainly, like I said, I struggle to remember such an overtly American oak charactered Springbank that I can remember. But like I said, it was a really interesting whiskey. Certainly not bad. Like I said, I think I personally preferred the local barley to it. The 2017 12-year-old cask strength, unfortunately long since gone, as the tendency to be with the 12-year-old. It does tend to sort of disappear, so I'm quite amazed. I've still got some left from this year's 2018 bottling, which is probably more in the style of, more classically, should we say, 12-year-old Springbank, as opposed to the 2017 bottling, or late 2017 bottling, which was very almost refill sherry character in its kind of delivery. And to me, I much preferred that. Although, like I said, I do like the character of sherry in Springbank with that kind of grittiness. The 25-year-old, it's just stunning, absolutely stunning. I mean, there are few whiskies in the world that can compete with Old Springbank, it has to be said. I mean, there are a few, obviously, but to me, Old Springbank it's in a class of its own almost, and is I wouldn't say sort of blind always noticeable, and certainly this wouldn't have said, if I'd have tasted this blind, I would not have picked it for 25 years old. I would have thought possibly 21, but certainly not 25. But it's still bloody good. So anyway. And the Longrow Red, yeah, really, again, really impressive. I mean, the guys at Springbank just don't make bad whiskey at the end of the day. It's just, it's a kind of a joy to sort of taste their whiskey. I mean, yeah, well, there have been one or two iffy bottlings over the years. I mean, that they are not immune to that kind of thing happening. And certainly when you're playing around with sherry casks, there is always the possibility of a sulphur blemish, and there have been in the past. But by and large, I would say over the last 5, 6, 7 odd years, you just can't argue with the quality. I mean, even the 10-year-old has come on in leaps and bounds, it has to be said, in quality, and long may it continue, as I say. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know a load of you that love Springbank. Like I said, I mean, I still have some stock left of the 12-year-old. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, then yeah, pop online and get yourself a bottle. But I guess for today, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good ramming.